Ah, hail and well met, adventurers. I must admit, you caught me quite off guard. No matter. I heard that your exploits at the tavern caused quite a stir with the locals. Today, I have perused the selections of our friendly neighborhood portal known as Reddit, and I have come up with 3 separate stories to share with you today. So, in the theme of measuring one's past actions, if you don't mind, let us collect this selection and move down towards the dungeons. I hope that setting is agreeable. I figured I may as well give your muscles something to do in order to burn off all of that extra sugar. Wonderful. Follow me, please. There. Much better. As I have said before, it fits the ambiance of these stories, does it not? The subspell r/rpghorrorstories is filled with tales of adventures gone awry. Sometimes these stories can feel a bit icky, as some would say. Some would also say that hindsight is 20/20, and we all know those at the table say, I have dark vision. So, in the theme of vision, maybe it is good to look upon oneself internally from time to time. Not all the time are the authors of valiant tales always in the right. So, you tell me, were these writers right or wrong? And I may give you a little bit of my own insight after each story. Without further ado, let us dive right into these stories from the portal known as Reddit. Let us call the kobolds and fetch us our drinks. Maybe I may call down the chef to fetch us some hors d'oeuvres. Listen close, adventurers, for our stories begin. So, real quick, real life creator, Kristen, I just want to take a second to explain that I am not making light of anything that this author is outlining. However, for the sake of YouTube and potential monetization and potential reach and the algorithm and everybody knows everything else, I will be replacing a few terms with some less threatening terms. And I hope that you know, as listeners, that this is not meant to be derogatory. It is just simply meant to replace words so I do not get in trouble with YouTube, because these are some really serious topics. This story is titled, I Think I Have a GMing Curse. That sounds awful, but you know, some people do have to deal with curses from time to time. Maybe they might need a paladin, or a cleric. Almost every time I try to GM, something weird happens. From internet problems to reckless attack balloons. Returning players. Corgi and Luno. I met them through the Chucklefuck saga, and we're close friends to this day. They played in most of these games. The other folks are either from other friend groups or from IFG. First time GMing. Went well. Second, connectivity issues so bad Corgi could barely play. Player A had a crush on me and was there to support me, but clearly did not want to be there and hit it poorly. They took several long phone calls with a different friend and eventually left mid-session. Third, internet cut out 15 minutes into the session. We just canceled. Fourth, my group was trying out Pathfinder 2e, and this was my first time DMing it. The reckless attacks were ballooning our uncanny dodge player's neighborhood while we were playing. We had to stop a couple times for him to take cover, and could hear the balloons going off through his Discord mic. The uncanny dodge player was okay, but the characters almost TPK'd because I forgot to rebalance the encounter after a different player no-showed. This turned the gaming group off of Pathfinder 2e for good. Fifth, I had to cancel and reschedule several times due to no-shows. Had a guy tell me about his double D-cupped waifus and brought one to... Hold on, let me take a second. Had a guy tell me about his double D-cupped waifus and brought one to the session, ignored source restrictions, and proceeded to cheat most of the game. I really should have kicked him, but I put up with his bullshit because I didn't want to ruin the night for the other players, and it was only a one-shot. Sixth, Corgi, Luno, Player B, and Player C were in this one-shot. Player B had a medical emergency and couldn't make it. He's okay now, Alrighty, so we start in a dingy seaside prison. You have been captured by the Legion of Dusk, a vampire faction for real or imagined crimes. How about you introduce your characters? Discord ping. Huh, guess player C is having internet issues. Corgi, Luno, and I wait a little bit for him to come back until I realize he's left the server and blocked me. Guess he didn't like the Skyrim opening. Honestly, I have no clue. Though that does sound like a doozy of a curse, I really don't have much else to offer for the removal of curses, as I myself am not a cleric. I'm more of a sorcerer, But I can say from personal experience, in real life, my husband and I's now gaming group, our immediate friend group that we play Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder with, the very first thing that was expressed to us in order to join this player group was that we needed to be able to prioritize our commitments to playing the game when we did set a time. And I do believe that that is very important. I understand that situations and emergencies and unfathomable things can happen. I really don't have any other offering other than to say maybe just another group. Always retry. If you want to keep DMing, go for it. Don't let unpredicted situations stop you from playing a game that you really enjoy playing. If you enjoy DMing, I say there are always online groups that are trustworthy and have some sort of like vetting to the players themselves and the DMs. I know there are websites out there that allow you to do that, where people can leave feedback on the player themselves, how they were as a player, and the DM, how they were as a DM. So maybe you can try going that option. I know you're not really asking for advice, but you know, if you need advice, that is mine to share. So, adventurers, is this author to blame? No, I think that we can safely say they are not. But that is just my perception. So, how about we move on to our next story? This story is called The First D&D Game I Ran. Almost 20 years ago, I was running my very first D&D game, 3.5. It was about a year of real time into the campaign. The only character who is relevant to the story was the party leader. He had started as a half-drow, eventually undergoing a magic ritual to become a full drow. He was a cleric of Veyron, who wanted to spread the worship of his god on the surface world. I felt frustrated that I could never, in my opinion, challenge the PCs in combat. Well, I got it into my head that I wanted to do this cool thing where the PCs needed to recover from a defeat, so I wrote an encounter that they had no chance of beating. That's, I will already say, that might be a recipe for disaster, my friend. The only monster I remember is a Drider, fighter/cleric of Lolth, who was something like ECL 18. It was a beatdown. The players were mad. I didn't notice how upset they were because I was all caught up in putting them into this cool thing I had devised. See, I wanted an excuse to show the players their gods in those gods' realms. So I came up with the brilliant idea of murdering them horribly in order to send them into the afterlife, so that they could fight their way back to life. Then that horrible Drider was gonna be a long-term baddie. The cleric's player in particular was a petulant and I can't even say it. The cleric's player in particular was a petulant and vindictive little shit. I did not take this into account when designing this mistake. When I got to his meeting with Veyron, he saw that Veyron was bound in Lolth's webs in the demon web pit, and basically rejected him on the spot. Then I, the damned fool that I was, basically had Lolth eat his soul. So yeah, I made a campaign-destroying plot, and it destroyed my campaign. It was a mistake that I have regretted ever since, and from which I have tried to learn over the years. Well, you know, whenever you start bringing in the gods physically to interfere with the affairs of your mortal players, I find that it causes a very large wrench to be thrown into the plot of whatever your players are working towards. It's always a really good thing to keep your gods and deities mysterious, one might say. How do they work? Do they work? Are they real? You might never know if you balance it correctly. A player would have to take their faith blindly and push forward and choose to keep pushing in the faith that they choose themselves, whether or not the deity is real or not according to you. This gives the player agency in their own faith, rather than a god coming down and just deciding something happens. Gods and deities can be tricky, no matter how well you try to portray them. If they are appearing physically, then you have to physically define them. And for a deity or a god, a lot of times that limits the power in which they hold, I feel. Because once you do define them, then they have limits. If that makes sense. So adventurers, how about this one? Are they to blame? My insight tells me... sort of. I think that it's a really cool idea to want to bring your players down to a low point in order to build them back up with confidence and strength. However, it needs to be balanced properly, or the characters themselves lose hope and stakes are lost because things have already been failed. If you do it improperly, it can leave players feeling helpless or weak or like they have failed the entire plot, and discourage them from continuing the play forward. So, in the instance that you want to maybe produce a plot like this, I would suggest asking around to other DMs who have juggled deities presenting themselves physically to the mortal followers that are the players, and see what worked and what didn't. That might be me rambling too much on this subject. So let us move to our third story. This story is titled, My First Experience as a Player Resulted in Ghosting. Hi, this is being posted on a throwaway account, mostly because I'd rather not have these kinds of posts associated with my main account, and partly to keep myself anonymous. I'll be honest and say that I'm not sure if this counts as a real horror story, but I did at least want to get this out there, since it did kind of scare me off a bit from doing more TTRPGs. It'll be a short story though. It was around a few months ago now. I was invited from a public server from a well-known r/rpghorrorstories YouTube reader to join in an Aliens franchise TTRPG. To note, none of the players are bad players or bad people in general. All of them treated me well enough. The players were all given a pre-existing character to play as, most likely based on a character from the Aliens extended universe. I don't remember the name of the character, but she was described as brash, loud, and I believe sarcastic? Forgive me, the campaign lasted only a single session for me, so the details are vague. Now I don't mind playing pre-existing characters. After all, I've played enough video games where characters are already made exactly as they need to be. But the issue was mainly that this character was the exact opposite of me. I'm generally a quiet person, tends to be more of a background person since I hate being the center of that much attention. I just didn't feel like I was playing this character right and felt bad for not doing much contribution-wise. We ended the first, and only session for me, on a post-fight scene after a close encounter with a couple xenomorphs. After the session, I won't really sugarcoat it, I made the one mistake that I really hate myself for to this very day. I ghosted the group. I never came back, never said how I felt about the campaign, just left. I ended up becoming the problem player in this story, all because my dumbass just didn't know how to articulate my feelings. I guess I was hoping for a more standard TTRPG, where I get to play a character that I feel more comfortable playing. But I never stated that to the GM. Out of shyness? Out of fear of disappointing them? Either way, it's my fault and I hold myself accountable for not making my feelings known. If the group happens upon this post and knows of a player that never showed back up in session 1, I want to apologize ghosting you all. It was nothing personal and I should have been more honest. Hope you guys had a great campaign without me, and maybe I'll find a game for me out there. Yes, I understand. Sometimes you are just so overwhelmed with things and emotions that you just kind of want to distance yourself from the thing that's causing these emotions. I get it, and I will say that I have been there in the past. Not so much recently at all, since I have learned how to articulate the feelings that come up due to certain situations and how to express these in a beneficial way with my peers. Sometimes it can be hard to push through feelings like this and be able to enjoy yourself. But if you were to speak to the GM, I'm sure they might have had a different character for you to play since these are pre-constructed characters. And I know I am not necessarily saying you have to follow in my advice, just throwing it out there. As one of my kobolds might say, I'm just throwing shit at the wall, seeing what sticks. I don't really know why he says that. Do any of you? I digress. Yes, so if you're ever feeling overwhelmed by a playstyle or a character that you're playing or anything of the sort, it's always best to express these feelings to the DM or GM who is running the game, and if they are not reciprocative of your feelings and your experience enjoying the game, then at that point it might be worth leaving to find a different group to play with. As I have said before, and I am sure I will say many times over the course of our tales, one should take away enjoyment from playing TTRPGs. Even if there's rough situations or rough scenarios or topics, you should still be able to enjoy yourself at the end of the day, because that's what gaming is all about. But again, what do I know? So, adventurers, was this person to blame? I think the unfortunate answer is yes. But do I fault them for it? Not entirely. I understand where they have come from. But do I fault them for it? No, not entirely. I believe that maybe the GM or DM who was running the game should have conferred with each player and seeing what they were comfortable with playing. I also believe that the author of this story should have spoken to their GM personally as well. So, those are the major stories I had to share with you today, but I also do have one small bonus story. This story is titled, Me, I Was the Horror. A few years ago, I joined a campaign about 2 sessions in. The DM liked my character. He was a nutty groundskeeper, native to the island which the other players were marooned on. And his thing was slaughtering demons and criminals and turning them into grisly art installations. He had some obsessive-compulsive tendencies, but I took it too far. To a metagame level. Unless I rolled an even number, I wouldn't attack. Completely stalled all the combat. Never was invited back. I cringe at myself. Facepalm emoji. Ah, yes, I can definitely see that being a complete issue. Especially if you define your character as having a mental illness and then playing it up to the nth degree that takes it a little bit too far. That is always a situation in which many people can take offense to, but also I can see it being, as you said, a very unacceptable metagame level of issues. Throw in the stalled combat and everything else being potentially a problem. I can't see longevity for a character like that in a serious campaign, or even a lighthearted campaign. I can see it wearing its welcome pretty thin. And I think that we can all agree that the last story we went over is definitely an issue. But that is all the time that we have today for stories. I thank you, adventurers, for paying me a visit once the hangovers subsided. If I were you, I would go back to the tavern and leave a few more coins for the innkeeps. From what I heard, they had a lot to deal with. Maybe instead of keeping you as visitors, I shall announce to the kobolds to prepare some rooms. That way we can keep good relations with the local business owners. And speaking of business, if you have need of any magic items while you take your long rest, I am stocked, and I do have magic items awaiting their new owners. And I can promise that none of them are cursed. If you would like to find any more visions of enthralling adventures while you take your long rest, the portals can be found on the shelves here. So, peruse our selection of tales. Should you have any questions, leave a note for me, and I shall see you again with more stories a week from now. Thank you so much for attending this reading, however cognizant you may be at the moment. But go, take your long rest and replenish your supplies, for it is time for us to part. May your wings sail upon pleasant winds. Until we meet again.